Welcome to our Socialist Action webinar tonight. Our topic is Crisis in Cuba, Facing the Imperialist Threat and the US Blockade. Tonight, our speakers with us tonight are Ike Nahum. He's the organizer of the International US-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition and founder of the New York, New Jersey Cuba Sea Coalition. And we also have Victor Nieto joining us, who was born and raised in Cuba until the age of 14. He's a decades-long sympathizer of the Cuban Revolution, a member of the Alianza Martiana in Miami, and a founding member of the US Hands Off Cuba and Venezuela of South Florida Coalition. I'm Nick Baker. I'm a member of the Socialist Action National Committee. And it's nice to be with you tonight. We'll be talking about the latest events in Cuba and what we've seen recently with protests on July 11th in Cuba, where that were inspired by the counter-revolutionary San Isidro movement with chants of Patria y Vida, a recently released reggaeton song that has several slogans against the Cuban Revolution, and the incredible economic strains that Cuba is facing at the moment with the blockade that has been intensified by Trump, and Joe Biden has done nothing at all to change that, and has left all of that perfectly in place, which has horrible effects on the Cuban economy. So to start with, Ike Nahum, could you tell us a little bit about what's been going on in Cuba? Ike, you're muted.
I've been telling people all night from meetings I just came off of to unmute at least 10 times in the course of the last meeting, and here I am doing the same. Yes, thank you to Socialist Action for inviting me. And again, I would like to note your stalwart support and defense of the Cuban Revolution over many decades, and your work in the broad united front that we are attempting to build to defeat the blockade and link up with the fight internationally that is stepping up. I think we can say that, and I just also want to say that I'm also a retired Amtrak locomotive engineer and a member of the Teamsters Union. I want to establish my my trade unionist credentials also for tonight, because I know that Socialist Action is working like I am working, and other groups to really reach out to to U.S. workers and the labor movement to win support for this struggle. And we've made some advances in that in the last period. I think it's important to see our work in trying to defeat the block, in moving to try to smash the blockade, and also the Cuban Revolution at this moment is at this is a turning point. What happened on July 11th, the onset of these protests in Cuba that were motivated primarily in terms of the numbers that came up in some of the working class neighborhoods in Cuba that had been, I mean, of course, they're totally hyped and exaggerated and lied about in the terms of the numbers that we've seen in this sort of almost unprecedented, at least since the onset of the special period in Cuba, and the great hopes in Miami and the hype and so on. When I say Miami, I don't mean Victor's Miami. I mean among the right-wing Cuban counter-revolutionary, Cuban-American counter-revolutionary forces that felt, oh, now the regime, the revolution is finally over. And this one right-wing columnist, Andres Oppenheimer, I'm sure many of you have read his garbage over many years, that even wrote a book, Castro's Final Hour, that got published, and that's what they believed, or his final days. But since then, and that propaganda drive, and then around the Elian Gonzalez case, in that special period when Cuba's economy declined 35% during the special period, that at least since then, this propaganda offensive, coordinated in all of the major capitalist media in the United States and in much of Western Europe, sort of a coordinated series of just disgusting and nauseating lies and half-truths that we've seen based on these demonstrations, which were hundreds of people in a few cities that were quickly met by hundreds of thousands of people that have demonstrated in support of the revolution, which has, of course, gotten less publicity. But at the same time, these protests were valid in the sense that it carries out what the imperialist policy has been. And in a moment when, because of the blockade, because of the tremendous shortages in Cuba, in the one neighborhood where it started, there was a blackout on top of everything else. I mean, people can imagine what the harsh conditions in Cuba. But nevertheless, the old dynamic of, that I think Goebbels said for the Nazis, that, a lie can travel first and fast around the world before the truth and reality catches up. And now I think in Cuba, this turning point that we're starting to see the counter offensive inside Cuba, and also measures of solidarity around the world that beginning to counter this, this has lagged behind the imperialist propaganda, but now the counter fight is beginning. Not only the mobilizations in Cuba, but very important signs of solidarity. For one thing, starting with in the United States, the solidarity movement has made an unprecedented, and I can announce publicly, we didn't want to announce it until the ship had arrived, but we have delivered 4 million syringes. We raised over $500,000, unprecedented for the movement, that are now in Mariel Harbor being distributed. 2 million more are coming from our sister solidarity organizations in Canada, and other organizations are starting to step up. The Pan American Health Organization is sending 12 million tons of medical supplies to Cuba. The Mexican government has sent 800,000 syringes and promises of more aid, and we think this is going to continue. And then we have this upcoming July 25th action in DC to welcome Carlos Lasso, that I hope Victor, and in the discussion we can talk about that more, that stems from Cuban Americans against the blockade. As you said in the introduction, what Biden has done, the criminal continuity and even deepening of the Trump policy, which involved 243 new measures that deepen the blockade. And that's the context of the, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but of the economic stress and so on that in Cuba, and a crisis in people's suffering and all of that. So this is these are the conditions that led to these protests, and immediately the agents of U.S. imperialism on the ground, and I mean that literally, people funded by, which is now being documented, and social media groups that organized by the CIA and other U.S. agencies, coordinated to go and turn these basically peaceful protests that were not repressed, that were allowed to gather, and that President Miguel Diaz-Canel attended, went right in them to talk to people and discuss the reasons and the measures that the Cuban government is taking, that these agents went into these things, initiated violence, overturned cars, attacked police and supporters of the revolution, and then had pictures that they could say, oh, this is terrible repression. We can get into that more in the discussion. But so this is the context of the whole count. So the theme I wanted to mention was that the counteroffensive is beginning. This is a turning point and a new challenge, because some of these forces that have been relatively dormant in the last period in the United States, they feel this is their Mallory moment. People may in this audience may recall the infamous memo that was finally declassified, where a top U.S. government representative said, I don't have the quote right in front of me, but says, we recognize the overwhelming support of the Cuban people. The only way to overthrow this regime is to increase the suffering, to bring about hunger. And he was very blatant about it. And that really is the policy. I mean, the other day, Biden said something about, oh, we would love to send remittances. I mean, part of the pressure that he's under as this counteroffensive begins. We would love to send remittances, but if we could just be sure that it wouldn't go, that the Cuban government wouldn't take a chunk. Although all they did was close down Western Union offices that people could send money to give to their relatives, you know. And then he had even the gall, the unmitigated gall to say that they would love to send Cuba vaccines, but they want to make sure they're administered by an independent medical authority. And we know that Cuba has created 5 vaccines, 2 of which are being used that have an efficacy on a par with Pfizer, Moderna, and the ones that were approved in the U.S. and that are being applied. Because the other side of the economic stress from the blockade is that there has been a surge of COVID cases in Cuba. And even this, which was forced on the Cuban government because they opened up a little bit to tourism because they're desperate for economic exchange. Tourism has collapsed in Cuba, which was a major foreign currency earner, some 95% of that trade. So this means that these shortages, there's no money in the till from foreign exchange, and so on. So these two things overlap. But now, again, as I said, I think the counteroffensive has begun. I can imagine I'm close to out of time, but I'll just make a few other quick points. We're going to counter this propaganda, and we are doing it. And people are starting to write and telling the truth. But we are confident in the solidarity movement that we have made a lot of advances over the past couple of years, but now we face great new challenges, in this next period. But we're going to rise to that. And this July 25th is action in DC is going to be our first attempt to do that. I'll just make one other point before I close, which is that we do not need to be on the defensive. If there is any repression, quote unquote, in Cuba, why is Cuba obligated any more than President Lincoln was during the American Civil War? You couldn't publish after 1863, when the Civil War radicalized and became an anti-slavery war. You couldn't publish pro-slavery newspapers. Why is Cuba obligated to tolerate paid agents? And it's open. The United States government openly gives $20 million a year, and then they have covert programs that they don't publicize to these paid agents. And we're going to tell the truth. But at the same time, if you read the speeches of President Diaz-Canel, if you look at the history of the Cuban Revolution, of how they deal with things, the first response of the government has been to go and talk to people, explain in a transparent way what's being done. None of this, of course, gets in the U.S. press, although recently I am starting to see a few articles that sort of grudgingly concede that that the situation is stabilizing and that the government is taking these kind of measures, and that people shouldn't have illusions that there was a very good Wall Street Journal article that pointed this out, that people shouldn't have the illusions that that regime change is going to come out of these events. So let me stop there, and we'll take up more stuff in the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ike, for that wonderful summary, and congratulations on the 4 million neat syringes. That's fantastic.
2 million more coming. We got another shipment that's on its way.
That's incredible. And Victor, you'll have an interesting perspective, having grown up in Cuba and now living in Miami, the home of the Cuban American National Foundation and the Annexionista Mafia. What's your view on what's happened in Cuba in the last few weeks?
Well, I'm happy to hear from Ike that that the fundraising that we did here in Miami, has come to fruition, and the syringes, the very much needed syringes, are in Cuban hands, and so. In terms of my perspective, my unique perspective is that I have been, since the age of 12, experiencing this war that has been going on against the Cuban Revolution, for like 62 years. His whole lifetime, for some people. As a matter of fact, that's the reason that I was sent to the United States as part of the CIA, manufactured campaign of lies that told Cuban parents that people like myself were going to be sent to Russia to be brainwashed, and when we came back, we would turn on our parents and turn them into police if they opposed the revolution. They went as far as that campaign was called the Peter Pan campaign, and thousands of people like me were sent to the United States by frightened parents, hoping to save their children from brainwashing in Russia. Since then, I was not brainwashed in Russia, but I was kind of brainwashed by reality of capitalism here in the United States. That was all I needed. I did not need to go to Russia to see what imperialism is like, and I've been, since the beginning, of course, since I started in college, I was radicalized, and I've been, fighting U.S. imperialism since then. And so we come to like here in my, so I was a railroad worker for 30 years, and I retired, and as soon as I retired, I came to Miami to be closer to Cuba, and it's been, it's been very interesting because since then I have seen that Miami is not as one-sided as portrayed, and now within the last year or so, there has been a lot of people coming forward that have been scared to come out before and join a caravan movement that has held about once a month caravans demanding demanding for the U.S. government to lift the blockade. So yeah, we kind of coming to a head on that counteroffensive, and yet we're really at the beginning of it. So I want to call people to come out on July 25th to call on the U.S. government to end the blockade on Cuba. I think there's nothing more important to do on that day than to go to Washington, D.C., Lafayette Park at 2 p.m. and do that. Of course, those who are far away or those for some reason can't go, in some cities there are caravans in solidarity with that action. And you know, those actions are really based on the working class principle of an injury to one is an injury to all. Cuban working class, working people in Cuba and their families are hurting because of that unconventional war I was beginning to speak about, spearheaded by the sets of economic laws and sanctions called the bloqueo, the blockade of Cuba's economy, going on since the middle of 1959, including assassinations, assassinated people that, Conrado Benitez, a literacy, about my age at that time, that went into the countryside. Cuba mobilized thousands of students to go in the countryside and wage a literacy campaign that was very, very successful. So yeah, since then, since the agrarian reform, man, the war started against the Cuban Revolution. It involved military invasions, terrorist operations, assassination attempts, on the leadership of Fidel Castro, and alongside of it, there's always been a propaganda campaign. But I think that kind of Ike hinted at. I think the propaganda campaign is matched, its highest peak, and it's ongoing. Everything that's been going on can be summarized as war. The United States has been at war with Cuba since 1959, and the Cuban people have felt it, and it's been hard. It is now more like a siege. Am I exaggerating? I don't know. It's President Biden acting as if nothing, because Biden is acting as if nothing is going on with respect to Cuba. He's studying the situation. But, I think that that something is going on a little different. And I think that they think that things are coming to a head in Cuba, that there is a crisis, and there is a peak going on, a peak on the suffering. Perhaps Cuba has never suffered as much, although I have heard that the special period in the 90s was very bad. But this time, with the internet and with a heavy, campaign of lies, things are much harder, because they have been targeting the youth, and the youth that have no idea sometimes of what has happened over the last 60 years. But I don't think I'm exaggerating. I'm worried because I remember the campaign in the Balkans, trying to overthrow, successfully breaking apart Yugoslavia and getting people involved in the Civil War. And at that time also it seemed like nothing was happening, but there was a lot happening. And the objective is to once and for all end the example that Cuba's working class has set in resisting the example of its independence from the United States. and while making some solid material gains in their lives. I lived through the agrarian reform, the beginning of the agrarian reform, the urban reform, that resulted in over 90% of Cuban working people owning their own housing. And the material, so the war is on the material gains that they have made. Government funded healthcare from the cradle to the grave, free public education from daycare through college and beyond, heavily subsidized and sometimes free public transportation. When I went to Cuba in 2016, for the first time since 1961, when I came to this country, I was impressed by right in front of where I was staying in a friend's apartment, in the Vedado section. I saw, buses from different work sites coming and picking up workers, and the buses, the public transportation was like almost nothing. Since the beginning, the libreta, the food distribution system, heavily subsidized. But, the war, the siege that they have now, that's what, Cuban workers, the price they have to pay. And here in Miami, since last year, we have been getting people to come out in caravans, not caring whether they're in full agreement with the U.S. with the Cuban government, whether they agree with everything in Cuba, but people are coming out because they know their friends and families are suffering in Cuba, and they understand that it is the blockade, the main reason why and they see the possibilities. If we get rid of the blockade, what Cuba can accomplish. So in Cuba, I agree. Since that first Sunday, things have been getting back to normal. People are not being bombarded by bots from the United States pretending they're coming from Cuba, saying everybody must go out, everybody must rebel. And people are not doing that. People are going out and talking to people, just like the government has asked them to do. The leadership in Cuba has asked them, hey, come on out and talk to these people. Naturally, there are some people you can't talk to because they're either paid or they've just been brainwashed to go ahead and start, throwing stones and attacking hospitals, going into like stores and looting them. What can we do now here in the United States? I think that going to Washington and participating on this action and more to come is the way. And I think that we have to reach out. Here in Miami, we've been concentrating on talking to the Cuban, because of the Cuban community. But it's hard. We have over 60 people from Miami going to Washington. It's a long trip, but people are, those 60 people are going to come back and they're going to be reaching out. And we're hoping that they reach out to the rest of Miami and the rest of the United States. Reach out to working people. I, for one, I'm going to reach out to Railroad Workers United. That's an organization that I belong to get some railroad workers involved in this campaign, calling on an end to the blockade. The International Longshore Workers Union has has come out with a resolution, very important part of the working class, calling on the U.S. to end the blockade. It's just, like Ike said, this is a turning point. We have a lot of ground to cover. Calling on people to come out and say, "Hey, we don't know what this campaign could wind up being, what could result." And the United States undertakes, and backs some kind of military action against Cuba, that's there's gonna be a lot of people dead, and the American people are not for this blockade, or for a military intervention. So that would be a big miscalculation if that happens. And we have a lot of work to do. And I think I'm calling on everybody listening to this and hoping that you call on other people, to join us and join in the monthly caravans and all the, let's talk to people. Let's explain what's really going on, and hope that we're successful in bringing some help to the Cuban people, and in the process helping ourselves understand what this country is all about, what this system that we live in is all about, and how we also have to follow Cuba's example. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, it's a very stark difference between the United States that has put its energy in this into ensuring that vaccines remain patented, remain exclusive for the wealthy countries, and Cuba, which has sent its Henry Reed Brigade of doctors around the world since the beginning of this pandemic to the hardest hit areas, and there was a movement for those doctors to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. We have, as you guys mentioned, this incredible achievement in a beleaguered country under economic blockade to create two vaccines that have about 92% efficacy against the coronavirus, despite the lack of resources, despite their scramble to attain resources as simple as syringes, right? As basic as syringes to administer to 11 million Cubans these incredible vaccines that their medical system has created. Of course, a medical system in which people in Cuba have a longer lifespan than people in the United States. But as you both mentioned, I mean, the economic conditions have been very difficult for people in Cuba, and that was a big part of what has caused people to be upset, to be frustrated. The fact that their tourism is necessarily severely curtailed by the pandemic, down 90%, major part of the Cuban economy. Their economy contracted 11% last year, which in context is about 3 times as much as the United States economy. And the blockade over its 60 plus years, I think the UN has estimated that it has cost Cuba over $1 trillion, which is equal to something like 12 years of GDP for Cuba. A gigantic amount of money that could be resources building socialism in Cuba, and have been instead, in the United States does everything in its power to weaken Cuba, and in its own words intends for this to be an attempt to create unrest and to attempt to bring down the Cuban Revolution. But let's see. We have some things. If you have any questions for speakers, please put them in the chat. Of course, we have the protest on the 25th at the White House, where people will be demanding an end to the Cuban embargo. As we saw the response that you guys both alluded to those July 11th protests where there were over 100,000 people on the Malecón with the slogan of put your heart into it, and calls from Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel for people to keep heart, understanding that there is tremendous suffering caused by this blockade, tremendous suffering caused by the lack of resources that the blockade imposes, the power losses, the food scarcity, and yet they have the libreta that at least ensures that everyone has a basis, a fundamental ration to provide them with something. And these protests, as you talked about, were drawn in large part from the poorest areas. People of color, a lot of Black Cubans were out in the streets, who have lived in the poorest areas and have suffered from racism that still exists. And yet these right-wing groups do everything they can to take advantage of any unrest, any frustration, and to project it on social media around the world, and to try to rally people to right-wing slogans. But as the president said, that there were many people who were not against the revolution who were in the streets even on July 11th. They were just people who've been suffering the effects of this horrendous blockade. And there were, many more people who were coming out strongly for the revolution, explicitly on this past Saturday at the Malecón, and so then the Cuban people are finding their way forward in this horrible situation, where we will do everything we can here in the United States to demand that our government end this horrendous blockade. Ike, do you have any further comments on what we've been talking about?
I would just say it's important to stress that, of course, Biden has made it difficult for to have any illusions in him in terms of what he's done. Many people had hoped that this would, that the change of administration would result in even some amelioration, at least some amelioration. But instead, we see that what Washington has done is to see that the conditions that they are causing and the suffering that is caused by the blockade is now creates an opening for them to think that they can push it forward. But it's important to understand that they do this out of a real political weakness. The UN had just voted 184-2 against the blockade. Hopefully some of those fine words that are repeated every year in the United Nations will translate into people defying the blockade. and going against it directly, which I hope the example of the Mexican government will spread especially in the Americas. But that isolation has been developing for a while, and this is one of the factors that why Biden is not, as he promised on the campaign trail, going back to the Obama policies. Why did Obama make a shift in 2014-15? It was because of that political isolation in Latin America, the impact of various summits, the accumulation of the votes in the UN, and so on, and the political isolation which remains for the U.S. This is an attempt, these events, highly orchestrated, but at the same time, as we're talking about tonight, they have an objective basis in the real deepening of the blockade and the accumulation of all the impact of the policies deepened under Trump and then now further continued under Biden. But we should not lose sight of that larger context. They're trying to gain the offensive, political traction. They're trying to get the so-called moral high ground, which is of course going to be impossible. And the counter-revolutionaries, the new generation of counter-revolutionaries among Cuban Americans. It's not automatically the old guard that were defeated at the Bay of Pigs and their milieu, but they feel they have some blood in their mouth, so to speak, and they started to believe their own propaganda. So this battle is going to be joined. It is joined, and at the same time, the basic strengths of the Cuban Revolution are starting to manifest themselves. I think this is a which side are you on moment that people need to unite against the blockade, and there is a lot of activity. You mentioned the fact that some of the working class neighborhoods that did get sucked into some of this, and some in the Afro-Cuban community, although by no means anywhere close to a majority, but that imperialist propaganda is trying to make this there's a hashtag, I'm sure it came out of Langley, Virginia, Cuban Black Lives Matter. You're starting to see MSNBC, flunkies like Joy Reid or Jason Johnson, people like that, talking about the racism in Cuba, and they're going out the fact that one of the national Black Lives Matter organizations came out with a pretty good statement, and because of the historic support in the African American community in the United States, this has always been seen by the imperialists as an Achilles heel for their campaign. So they're going after that. They're stepping up their propaganda on that front, and that also will be answered. So the road to stabilization. I mean, now we are going to start to see the Cuban vaccines step up. The syringes are now, happening. We should hopefully we'll see these COVID numbers go down, and at the same time, stepping up of material aid and deepening the political isolation of the U.S. That this, I think that this will be more and more of a spent force. I'm not trying to downgrade the importance of this propaganda. Defeating the Cuban Revolution, as Victor said, is extremely important. When Biden said initially before July 11th, well, it's just not our priority. We're not thinking about it. We're going to review it. Blah blah blah. That was a big lie. You can be sure that they are monitoring, and now they are trying to take the offensive. So, as Fidel said, this is going to be a period of the battle of ideas, and through that, we'll start to see some advances on the economic and social front in Cuba that can begin to turn this situation around.
Thanks. And Victor, do you have
Yes.
a final word for us?
Yes, yes. It's important to say that why are people going? Over 60 people from Miami, working class people, are going to as far as D.C., Washington D.C. on July 25th. It's because they have been participants of this year-long campaign that came as a result of Trump's new sanctions, 243 new sanctions that tightened, tightened the noose, on the Cuban economy to the extent that people overcame their fear of expressing what they were feeling. Here in Miami, there's a lot of companies that are owned by right-wing Cubans, and that people cannot say, talk on the job. They cannot express, they cannot identify themselves as being against what the United States is doing in Cuba. People are afraid, so they hadn't been coming out. But these sanctions, it was a straw that broke the camel's back, and people started coming out and saying, I might not agree with everything, but what I do agree with is that this blockade's got to go. And so we started focusing on that. And Carlos Lasso, a Cuban, exiled, I hate the term because, a lot of people didn't have to leave Cuba that left Cuba. And, he started thinking, the same thing, that the blockade is what is keeping Cuba from, advancing, and what's hurting the Cuban people. And so he came all the way from Seattle, Washington, in an RV to Miami the last Sunday of June, and from here we had our last caravan, the caravans have been spreading all over the place, in every corner of the world, and even in Cuba there were caravans, large caravans, outnumbering the protests that have been going on. And so from here, they left in a walkathon, some kind of walking campaign, all the way from here, Miami, to Washington, D.C. On the way, they have been stopping in different places and talking to North American people, talking to union activists, talking to civil rights activists, talking to black farmers, I'm not sure exactly where they're now, but they must be somewhere in South Carolina or North Carolina, and they're going to be getting to, this Sunday coming, they're going to be getting there, and people from all over the United States are going to be there to join them, calling on the government that if they're so concerned, one of the themes that Biden and counter-revolutionaries have is, oh, this is a humanitarian campaign that they're waging. Well, if you're humanitarian, then you should stop the blockade. That's just so common sense. And so yeah, 2 o'clock in Lafayette Park, uh, I think is the beginning of a new phase where more and more organizations are in different sectors of U.S. society are going to be joining this campaign to end the blockade, end the economic sanctions, stop the United States from even thinking of some kind of military intervention, um, because it's not going to work, and it's gonna be defeated. So and internationally and in the rest of the United States, you know, people are going to come forward. So please come out if you can. If not, tell other people that can to go to Washington or to do solidarity actions in their own city on Sunday, July 25th, 2 p.m. at Lafayette Park.
Can I just add one thing real quick on this? It's very important to one of the reasons for this propaganda offensive on the part of the U.S. government and its media lackeys is to cut off the prospect of any amelioration and to solidify within both capitalist parties, any forces that might want to, use some congressional action that had been in motion. They're definitely moving to consolidate and putting pressure on on those individual representatives that had introduced legislation or were thinking about. This is to push back against that. But at the same time, as that means more and more to go into the streets, and this is why July 25th is the first, and all the Cuba Solidarity Forces. I saw in the chat that somebody had asked what other groups are doing, and we could say a broad spectrum from Code Pink and National Network on Cuba, local solidarity organizations, Answer, other political parties, in fact, the whole gamut, DSA, many broad forces, and also revolutionary-minded and self-identifying socialist forces, but broader than that, are all uniting more and more against the blockade. And that's a good sign, and that's what they hate to see. So there's going to be unintended consequences from all this lying propaganda, because they're disgusting people and they're forcing people to act. I've probably gotten more calls since July 11th from people that had sort of faded out and haven't been too active lately and are saying, "What are you doing? Where can I go to protest?" And I think we're going to see more and more of that, especially as Cuba starts to turn around the situation internally and overcome these difficulties.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Yes, this pandemic really opens people's eyes to a lot of things, and to the basic cruelty and inhumanity of U.S. imperialism, and the fundamental internationalism of the Cuban Revolution. It couldn't be a starker contrast. And absolutely say, U.S. hands off Cuba, end the blockade, long live the Cuban Revolution. And if you enjoyed listening to us tonight, subscribe to our channel, go to socialistaction.org. Thank you, Ike Nahem and Victor Nieto, for being with us tonight. And good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Abajo el bloqueo.